joining SparkCon 2020 as we evolve through these presentations and the presenters and the speakers that are involved in this amazing event. I just want to welcome you and get your involvement. We're going to be doing Q&A along this session, and we're going to be talking to David Lewis, who's an amazing individual that has been studying for years on the environmental concerns and some of the things your business needs to be successful and be protected in today's environment. David, thank you so much for being here. And I just wanted to allow you a moment to kind of explain and outline what we want to cover today.
Okay, sure, Russ. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So what we want to cover today is, primarily around environmental compliance, even though I will touch on HSE. HSE kind of encapsulates health, safety, and environmental in industry. And most of the time, the HSE professional looks after the environmental compliance for the company. So we'll talk, just kind of open up with, there have been obvious changes through the prior presentation, explained well, lots of changes happening right now in oil and gas with reductions in force, downsizing, mergers and acquisitions, things that are going to prompt a lot of changing of roles and responsibilities in an organization. Certain people that had, per se, the responsibility of environmental management, maybe that has now been passed to another individual. Sometimes that person that now, kind of has that role on their plate is not necessarily a HSE practitioner. So the goal of this is to really keep things from falling through the cracks. We want to make sure that we, reduce our risk by managing our HSE and particularly environmental compliance, making sure that these things don't slip through the cracks. That increases our risk. We're going to go through that by first talking about internal compliance, and then we're going to go to external compliance, and we're going to kind of end up with some, take-home messages and best practices and things of that nature.
Internal compliance is key for any organization to maintain, record keeping and the knowledge management, that whole ecosystem of what is our knowledge and what is our information and how do we store it and where does it go? And I know that a lot of this conference, we're talking about knowledge management and knowledge transfer. And you pointed out, and I want to bring it up a little deeper level, is there's a lot of transition in any industry. And right now in 2020, there's a lot of movement internal to your organization. There's a lot of opportunity for things to be maybe, overlooked, or maybe, new people that coming in haven't been available to be brought up to speed by, historical information and data. So on internal compliance, what are the key factors and elements that we need to be considered as we move through the organization?
Okay, so internal compliance is essentially compliance with policies, standards, procedures, or basically your written management system. This could be, for instance, HSE compliance. It could be HR. It could be operations compliance. There are many things kind of wrapped up in this written management system. You also have companies that are, say, ISO 14001, 9001, OSAS 18001 compliant. They also have things that they have to keep up with, and I kind of bundle that ISO types of compliance into the internal compliance category.
Okay.
So really, you have your policies. Your policies are your commitment to managing your environmental or health, safety, compliance in the organization. This is your commitment. And as part of most management systems, there is a requirement to do an internal look, at least on an annual basis, at these policies, procedures, that making sure they're correct, fit for purpose, they're relevant. These things change over time. So that deserves a once a year look anyway. And that should be, that should happen as it is. But again, as we go through these changes in organizations, this document control kind of slips a bit. You go from going, to looking at them once a year to once every couple years, and then it kind of ends up getting handed to the next guy sometimes. Yeah. So that's pretty important. And really keep in mind the best management systems are the simple ones. Keep it simple. Don't commit to things that you're not doing on the ground. It's gonna get you in trouble with the audit.
Yeah.
So,
well, it really boils down to who, when, where, why, what,
exactly,
how. Those elements that you bring and that knowledge transfer. Anytime you move it from one place or one individual or one team to another, that documentation is a live document. It has to be updated on a regular basis in order to maintain not only the compliance, but the ever-changing environment that we in the environmental field. And we'll get into that later. However,
absolutely,
I think it's important that we talk about the process and how we can actually make it simpler for individuals or organizations.
So on that point, Russ, document control is really important, and a lot of great companies fail at document control. It's important to have some kind of structure for that. It can be simple. Sometimes some companies use SharePoint, and various other platforms to manage, control their documents. This needs to take place first, is taking a look at what's in place. Knowing that things need to be updated or changed throughout the system. Assign a person or persons that have a document control background. Document control is a skill set, and it's often overlooked as very administrative. We'll just give it to this person that has some time, but it is quite technical. When it gets down to technical writing and modifying documents to fit the organization, it's a real skill set. So make sure that role is with someone that has that level of experience and competency and can also communicate.
Yeah.
Can communicate to the departments and find out what's changed. What are you doing on the ground, and verifying that that's being done, so you're not committing to something in policy that you're not doing.
Yeah. Well, I think organizations need to not diminish the value that it brings to the table, because I know from my experience that by properly producing documentation and scope of work and how you process this information can actually save a lot of money in the organization by reducing your risk and exposure and all of the things that are associated with environmental controls.
Absolutely.
And I know that when everybody understands it and is communicated accurately and very clearly, it's much easier to own it as an organization and a culture. So I just encourage organizations not to diminish that at all. So how can you create a baseline or move forward in an organization, David, to get to that goal?
So start out with just doing an inventory and a review of what's in place. And then secondly, is it still relevant? Is it practical? Take a look at that. You also want to look at what's required and what's not. You have to be as stringent as the government requires, and you can kind of go over that a bit, but you don't want to commit to too many things that really you can't accomplish on the ground,
right?
And you don't have the workforce to accomplish. So you want to stick with what's actually required by law first, and anything else that you can fit in to make your organization better, more safe, then you can add those pieces if you can manage it.
Yeah.
Whatever changes you make to your system, once you get through that, which can be a fairly large task, get through that. It's communicating those changes to the field, communicating to operations in the field, what's changed, where are these documents located, where are these commitments located. Out in the field, they have work instructions. Work instructions are another control document.
Yeah.
When that piece of equipment goes away, that work instruction goes away. When a new piece of equipment or a facility gets added, and then you have more work instructions. These are also control documents. So the management system can go pretty deep. So it is a lot. It sounds like a lot, but it's really doing a comprehensive review of what's in place, what's changed, making those changes to your system, communicating that, and implementing it. And then going forward, doing check-ins. If you have to do one in 6 months for the first one, to make sure that, okay, this is fit for purpose, it's achievable, doing some tweaks, and then coming back in another 6 months, everything's good, and you just kind of keep that going.
It's interesting because it comes to mind that even if your environment stays fairly static, there's a lot of movement in the industry right now with mergers and acquisitions,
right,
and things like that. So I have to imagine that someone like yourself or someone that's in document management or knowledge transfer and information would want to create a gap analysis. It's because there's probably some practices that a new environment would bring to the table, and you want somebody that is quick, effective, and efficient at those documents to be able to identify what is really important and what is necessary to be modified for the new environment. And so maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Sure. It's really an audit of what's in place. It's an audit against, what's in place and what's actually required. And then again, if you want to take it a step further and have some kind of organizational things that you want to have in there that are above and beyond what's actually required. And when I mean required by law. So you want to have those fundamental pieces, and that's really your gap analysis. What's your gap against what's there, what's required by law, and what would you like to have, to be a better organization, something that's, taking it a step further.
And it might go further because of an operational process that you already have in your business that actually exceeds the compliance level and just makes an operational efficiency that allows you to actually, increase and improve the culture and the environment. So,
right, you'd want to be able to understand that, and obviously the auditor, the person doing a technical look at this system, is going to need to understand the operational piece as well. So that's where the communication. You can't be an expert at everything.
Right.
That's where the communication comes in. You talk to someone that's in tune with the regulatory requirements. You talk to the operational folks, and you meld that all together into a fit for purpose system.
So in internal controls, there's a lot of processes, and like you said, it doesn't have to be complex. It doesn't have to be. It does have to meet the compliance standards, and then maybe the organizational standards.
That's right.
What about some of the things that might be an exposure to because I know there have been cases where even insurance compliance, not necessarily regulatory compliance, but your policies and some of the things that might drive some of your decisions in your organization. Does that also impact internal compliance?
Absolutely. Risks that have been identified certainly need to be incorporated into the policies. And that's a good point you brought up, because these things are not necessarily, in the environmental or safety regulations or something you've been doing as a company. These are things that kind of pop up as changes in the insurance industry. These are changes that have to be melded in, and those risks need to be identified. Some of the larger organizations have a risk assessment kind of either internal practice or they have consultants come in and do risk assessments to identify those things that are medium to high risk that need to be managed. How do we manage those risks? Well, we put something in a policy to manage those risks. We make it a requirement to take a certain step to offset or mitigate this particular risk. So yes, these are living documents. These are living documents. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of organizations have seen the parallel of risk analysis with insurance carriers and also the environmental impact and with compliance, and then bringing those two together. I know that the risk factor and the the overall percentages we're paying for insurance go down as we reduce our accidents, reduce our exposure to environmental concerns or anything like that. And obviously there's some actuarial numbers in there at some point in time, and if anything we can do to reduce our organizational level below those
Yes.
numbers, we're going to be more efficient as an organization. So
yeah, and you may, to that point, you may have to demonstrate to an insurance company that you're doing something or you have such a program to mitigate that risk in order to bring your premiums down. Absolutely. So.
How do we bring in internal compliance alongside HR, where some of the minimum requirements, it may not necessarily be as efficient as we could be if we talked to the people in the field and understood what the workflow was and how we could apply that compliance to a process and document that process. How involved can we get with the employees and the staff and the teams in the field to help and support our internal compliance?
It's leadership. From my experience in field operations and visiting numerous operations, working with teams, it's leadership, and your leaders have to believe in it. They have to own it, and if your leaders don't own it, no one beneath them will. So they really have to make it important at the very top, and that trickles down.
Yeah.
You can't put that on the individual employee. The leaders have to own it, and they have to implement that.
Well, and they have to support it as well.
Absolutely.
It's oftentimes, sometimes the environmental officer or somebody in compliance would actually identify something that can be improved, and leadership still needs to take ownership of that and endorse it and support the changes in the updates in the documentation, the updates in the process, the updates in the culture. Sometimes there's some things that not everybody's willing and excited about change, especially in the environmental field. It's sometimes a challenge. So how do you talk to organizations about that, David?
I always go back to the leadership as discussed. The leaders have to own it. Sometimes the central offices will have, folks from the central office come out and kind of, lay out the changes. No one's happy with change. No one's happy with change. It's brutal. If they have to do another form or more paperwork, the best change is taking paperwork away.
Yeah.
Taking away paperwork that is not really required and you've just been doing for a while, and you kind of take that away. But whatever you develop or create going forward has got to be easier on the field. I mean, that's where it's happening.
Yeah.
And you've got, whatever you do, you have to make it easier on the folks on the ground. You have to be easier on them.
Yeah. Anything we can do, remove the complexity, right?
Yeah, just keep the paperwork at a minimum for those guys. Let them focus on being safe and carrying on their work. Make it easy on them. Whatever changes need to be easier on the field.
I want to ask this question from somebody that's had a lot of experience, because I think it's important for a lot of people that aren't in this arena and don't have a knowledge base in what you're doing and how you're helping. So what are some questions that a lot of organizations may not think about or consider that they really need to maybe put more emphasis on?
I guess questions. As a leader in an organization, I would want to be able to easily locate, the system, and really the written standards and how I'm supposed to operate, how the company's supposed to operate. I mean, are those accessible? Locate them, and then second of all, read them.
Yeah,
pick them up and read them. And and these commitments are made all the way up to the CEO that's signing off on this stuff.
Yeah.
And at any level in an organization, you can pick up one of these documents or standards. You read it, and if it's not correct, mark it up and give it to someone to fix. Raise your hand, say this is not practical.
Yeah. Or if it's unclear, that's when you can actually get somebody that's versed in the language of the topic, or somebody with more technical expertise than yourself. Because, like you said earlier, sometimes it's delivered to an individual that may not be the most seasoned in the organization. So I think that's really important. These are incredibly valuable points, David. And I just want to remind everybody that drop your questions in the Q&A. And if you have questions or you have an open-ended idea or thoughts that you want to add to this conversation, please drop them in there. We'll bring them up and get you an answer, or at least identify that that's an issue and maybe get back to you if it's a more complicated response. Okay. So David, I want to kind of shift gears now. We've been talking about internal compliance and documentation and knowledge transfer and the ability and opportunity for improvement and how that all fits into the organization. So now, if we share a little bit more about external controls and some of the things that are outside of the documentation and how that impacts the environment, and how do we catalog that and communicate that? So
I've separated internal and external compliance, policy, standards, procedures from, what the government requires essentially. Mm-hmm. So external compliance is the way we see it is compliance with the federal government, local government, state government, internationally with that particular country. So this is really compliance with the government body. And, there's a lot of this as well. Uh-huh. Sometimes there are pieces of external compliance that make their way into your management system sometimes, but sometimes not. A lot of times not. This compliance could be really permits or plans. Let's just say permits to discharge, permits for air emissions or wastewater or stormwater. These are permits you have in place to be able to discharge to the environment. There are a number of these. And along with a permit, you have a plan. A lot of times you have either a contingency plan, like an oil spill contingency plan, mm-hmm. or you could have a stormwater plan or some kind of plan in place, which is really your instruction on how to manage the requirements under that permit. So it is a lot. There is a lot of this, and it's often by facility. So it's not something you can have in a corporate office that's kind of encompasses, all of your operations. It's usually related to that particular facility. And, every facility, is going to have specific, there's some overlap, of course, but you're going to have specific environmental regulatory requirements from various agencies. So how do you get your arms around all that with all the changes? I always advise doing an inventory, a facility by facility inventory of what does this particular facility have to have in place? What kind of permits, operational permits? Again, it could be federal or state level, less often local, but usually federal or state. What needs to be in place, first of all, and then is it in place? Is there a current permit in place? You could always check by going online to either EPA or, in the case with environment, a federal website or a state website, and look up the permit. If you can't tell if it's still in place, a lot of permits in the air and water space tend to be like 5-year permits.
Okay.
And they're good for 5 years. They typically have to be renewed and submitted for a permit renewal 180 days before that 5-year expiration date. So you kind of do an inventory of what you have to have, what's in place, and then there are certain plan requirements under those permits. And do you have those plans in place? Because the plans are what often get audited by the agencies when they come in to take a look at that facility. They will ask for a certain contingency plan or operational plan, especially for pipeline operations, operation maintenance and emergency manuals, operator qualification programs, pipeline integrity management programs, things like that you have to have in place, along with the permit. And, depending on that facility location, you've got different environmental risks. You've got different, for instance, in wastewater, you may have a receiving water that is an impaired water. So there's more to do with that particular permit than if you're just discharging to a ditch, per se. Yeah. Certain air permits are very different from one another. From facility to facility, very different. Attainment versus non-attainment. Are you a Title V permit or are you a minor source permit? Very different permits. So you want to kind of do an inventory of what's in place, what needs to be in place, what is in place, and that's really the gap analysis. Yeah. And then those things that need to be fixed, get on top of that, because that's where the penalty, the enforcement action kind of comes in. Potential reputational damage and lots of other risks. I mean, most importantly, risk to the environment comes in when those things aren't being done. Then there's this ongoing compliance in wastewater. There's monitoring. In air, there's monitoring. Are you doing that on a regular basis? And are you reporting that data to the respective agency? And are you exceeding your limitations? If you're exceeding your limitations, that's a flag. The operator needs to call that out, and there's a corrective action there. So how does that all get done? Yeah. And of course, there's part of this kind of bleeds into a management system as well. How do we manage this? So there's a lot in the external compliance space. If a company in these times, certainly the agencies recognize that these are trying times. Yeah. With these circumstances, can you ask, do you have a grievance and where you can contact the agency and ask for either not necessarily forgiveness, but maybe some more time to comply with something you're delinquent in at the time? That's very important to have that communication with the agency. I would advise communicating with them before they hit you with a letter or a phone call.
Well, I have to also believe that, ease of access, just like we talked about the internal compliance, ease of access out in the field and in those environmental, especially as it relates to permits, having that information available for anybody that happens to, come on for an inspection or anything like that, having that and being proactive with that process and making sure that the plans support the permits.
Mhm.
And I'm sure there's a relationship there that, you have to look at on each permit, and it may be different from site to site or state or local or, federal regulations. And then also, so it's kind of almost a one off case in some specific instances. There may be multiples, but you have to figure out all of the exposures you have for permitting requirements at those sites. And not everybody is involved in that process to the degree that they understand all of the permits required. So,
Right. Right. And, with the larger oil and gas companies, you have that expertise, say, in a central office or a corporate office.
uh-huh.
And, when you get out to the site, you kind of have the operation supervisors, superintendents, OIMs, etc., the leadership out there that they may be in touch with some of it, but again, they're focused on operations. So it's important for the organization to have a manager, HSE, or environmental person to connect with that facility and make sure they have all those pieces in place. And then, most importantly, do training with those guys so they understand what they have to do on a regular basis, whether it's water sampling or visual observations of samples or opacity observations for air compliance, things like that have to be done and recorded on a regular basis, and make sure they have the correct compliance calendar, if you will, or some other notification, whether it's, it could be quarterly, it could be weekly, depending on the frequency of that particular permit, that they are managing that on the ground. And they have the document, they have things ready if and when an auditor shows up, whether it's an internal auditor or someone from the government shows up on site, and they know where things are. That's very important.
Well, and I know this is the same thing as it relates to the internal compliance with your carrier insurance. Some of the things that you're operating on and some of the risks that exist in the industry. If you can minimize that and show exceptional project plans that reduce and remove risk, those are benefits and savings that you can achieve in every organization.
That's right. That's right. Demonstrating compliance, through record keeping, through training your operations folks, and making sure you're doing that. You're communicating. You're doing drills, for pipeline and production facilities, oil spill drills.
Yeah.
Some of those are required to be done at a certain frequency, but bringing that to the next level and maybe tightening that frequency up could be, a way to manage risk. So yeah, there's a lot in the way of complying with government requirements, and it is very much a facility by facility look. And unfortunately, it's really hard to bundle a lot of facilities that are, they're located in different places with different risk profiles. They handle different volumes of production.
Yeah.
They have different storage, lots of different, so many differences, and it really needs to be looked at individually. So,
well, and someone like yourself working with SparkThought, or somebody that's really versed in the technical writing and documentation process, can take loads off of your internal employees, and also with the opportunity to actually get more accurate in their communication and make sure that those plans are very, very clear and concise to the person out doing the work. And if there's a reference document that they need to go to, it's easily accessible. It doesn't take them a long time through reams and reams of paper to paragraph that they're looking for that.
Correct. Less is more.
Yeah.
Keeping it simple. I mean, our audience is the field.
Uh-huh.
And if the field is not reading and understanding this, and it's not simple, it's not in, let's say, layperson's terminology, then it's going to be hard for them to chew on. We were always taught, right to about a 6th grade competency level.
Yeah.
This is good for a lot of reasons. It makes more educated people read things faster and understand them faster. And it's a benefit for folks that haven't reached a certain degree of education because they can understand it. Or if English is not their first language.
Absolutely.
I mean, we have to be sensitive to that.
Absolutely.
If these folks are our operators, they have to be able to read the policies and read the rules. If they can't read the rules, then they're certainly at risk, and they can't, and they're not able to train other people. Communication's huge. It's probably
So I want to drop a few questions in here just to keep us active and moving forward on this. Chad suggested, so management of change on the procedures is as important as management of the documents itself. Great point, David. Tell us about that and expand on that a little bit, David, because I think it's really key to make sure that we plant that seed and nurture that idea in all of our organizations.
Well, management of change, it looks different in different organizations and the way they handle that. It could be as simple as, hey, we've got this change. Let's have a quick meeting, document the meeting, and make the change to the policy. Mm-hmm. Some organizations have a management of change procedure, if you will, where the change is identified, the need for change is identified, and it goes through a series of authorization. And then that also includes communication, the communication stage, and then completing that circle to the policy update. The biggest issue I've seen with management of change programs is they just take too long.
Yeah.
And sometimes they get caught up at a certain stage and they just can't or won't move forward. We're waiting for this guy to sign off on it before we can go to this next guy. And it's not happening fast enough. So the management changes is very important. Keep it simple and keep it moving. If it's a change that needs to happen, keep it moving, get that policy updated, communicate it to the operations, and let's start implementing the change.
And it's just
especially with safety. Especially with safety, because a lot of times that change comes from someone getting hurt.
Yeah.
And making a change that's going to keep other people from getting hurt. We don't want to get caught up in bureaucracy or these steps that are going to keep this from happening.
Yeah. So, and chain of custody to make sure that you're not dropping any kind of pieces and parts of the process, I think is important as well. And that's probably something that you do on a regular basis, just making sure that each step of the way that there's a process implemented or a procedure update, or it's communicated to the right people.
Right.
So also Claudette says, David, what are the impact of environmental metrics focused on midstream energy companies in the process of raising capital?
Okay, so you may be talking about things like sustainability and it could be diversity, inclusion type metrics, and these metrics that are really becoming a topic these days. Mm-hmm. And I guess again she's asking, how do we focus on these metrics in order to get capital? Some of the lenders are looking at these metrics at the various organizations, see how they're doing, as evidence of their risk profile. And if they're doing well in these areas it could be an environmental metric, it could be a metric. I mentioned sustainability, but it could be something like greenhouse gas emissions too. Mm-hmm. And how are we reducing over time our greenhouse gas emissions? And there is a ranking system that I'm not really up to speed with, but it's a way, it's certainly a metric for some of these categories in environment and other places where the lenders are looking at your scores as as kind of a snapshot of your risk. Right. So, in terms of environment and coming up with these, goals, whether it's greenhouse gas sustainability, recycling type things, for waste management,
all of those.
All those things can be set up, and from what I've seen, they look different in different companies.
So we're taking a poll here also. Just if you have a management process in place, we'd love to know about it. If you don't, love to know about that too. There's no, everybody has a different version of what that actually suggests. Correct?
So I'm not sure if I answered that last question properly, but that's my knowledge.
And I wanted to extend the thought a little bit more, David, because it's a great question. And as it relates to, some of my experience in the safety industry, if your level of measurement and your metric is below the standard or the average industry of that, that's a sign, that's an indicator, a leading indicator that you're doing some things that are right. So I would anticipate that as it relates to funding, that would be a good thing. Now, it's not always true. However, I have to believe that that's some of the things that lenders or organizations would look for as they're doing merger or an acquisition. So
yeah, I'm not sure how standardized this ranking is. But if and when it becomes standardized, you could almost see the trends. Uh-huh. So maybe they are looking at an upward trend of continuous improvement in these metrics as a basis for lending or not lending to a certain company.
Yeah, and I hope that answers your question. If you could expand on that, Claudette, be happy to expand on the answer. What are your thoughts on HSE audits? Is it a good practice to conduct internal mock audits? If so, why?
I think it's a very good practice to do. Many management systems have that as part of their management system, that they will, let's say at an annual basis, they will perform an internal audit. And what that typically is taking a sampling of your commitments under your management system. You're taking a sampling of those and you're asking for evidence to be provided of whether that's being done or not. I mean, simply. Mm-hmm. And you're taking a look internally. This is not an agency doing it. It's not a certification authority, for like an ISO, but it's a way of keeping everyone on their toes a bit, and also identifying problem areas before someone from the outside identifies it, or before you have an accidental discharge to the environment or someone gets hurt.
Yeah.
So it's very important. I think I feel it's a fundamental to a good management system is doing internal audits. You can do those with your staff, or you can have someone come in, a consultant come in from the outside, if it feels better to have someone external. I've seen organizations that won't do that internally because of the culture. Yeah, they don't want someone being the auditor, and all of a sudden that there's a rub. There's a rub there, and they bring someone third party in to do that. Yeah, and we've done that in a number of cases over the years, and it's good exercise. It doesn't have to be a 1 week audit. It can be a couple days.
It doesn't have to be painful either.
It doesn't have to be painful. It's communicating areas that need to be improved.
I would even offer to many individuals or organizations that it can actually be a learning experience. And some of the employees, when provided the opportunity to help contribute to the outcome, actually can come up with some very good ideas as long as it's documented and meets all of the criteria.
Definitely.
It's like they're out in the field, they're doing the work, they're processing the information. So make sure that you have an opportunity to help them communicate that, and then have somebody like David or others, transfer that knowledge into a document that could be used going forward.
Right. It's great to get the input from the guys on the ground, because they're the ones, having to implement this stuff. And often, you have folks in the office that may not make it out in the field that often.
Yeah.
And
they need to know how to locate it as well. It goes both directions.
Yeah.
So if they're part of the process and they're included in the process, instead of just, hey, here's the process, do it or else. That's less palatable than it is saying, hey, help me understand what this problem is, and let's make sure that we solve a problem that meets all the criteria for our organizational goals.
Yeah, and for these look backs at policies and these internal audits, again, keep it moving.
Yeah.
Don't get caught up in committees and meeting after meeting after meeting. Keep it moving. It's not helping anyone if it's getting caught up in these steps. So just move right along.
Yeah, compliance is no place for a committee, is it?
So
I'm sure there's some other questions coming up. We had some polls about the polls. I want to answer the questions on the polls, and then maybe you could speak to them. Does your company have a management system? And we touched a little bit on this earlier in the internal compliance. Kind of describe, for those that may not necessarily be fully invested in these systems, what it might look like, and what is potentially an opportunity that we can look at.
So management systems, I guess, generally speaking, it's this broad term. It's about how you manage your business. What do you have in place to manage the way you do business?
Yeah.
And management systems encompasses, of course, HSE that we've kind of focused on, but it's also human resource, it's operations. There's a number of things in a company's management system.
Yeah.
It could be very simple. It doesn't have to be hundreds of policies on various things. It can be very simple. It can be a set of rules. Sometimes it's encapsulated in, some of this stuff's encapsulated in an employee manual, or a handbook of some sort. But it's a set of guidelines for how to do business, and it's also some commitments that the company has on managing things and their risks and risks that could affect the environment, or could be a human resource risk or operational safety risk. It's a way of managing those risks. And that's what it is in a nutshell. Taking that a step further, it can get compartmentalized, where different compartments within the company have their own sets of policies, standards, procedures in the way of operating that particular department. It can be as simple as keeping these in some kind of protected document structure or file structure on a server, which is a bit old school these days, but there's still that going on if it's managed properly. Or it can be in a document control system, kind of a check-in, check-out system. I've seen those. I've seen SharePoint systems. The one I think fallback on policies, if you read enough of these, they're typically in this format. it looks like a government regulation format where you have, 2.3.4.5, and you've got all these kind of section numbers, and it's a lot of spacing. They're not easy to read for the layperson.
Not always.
And unfortunately, that's kind of the format of these policies. They're not friendly to read at all.
Yeah.
I would like to see an easier format evolve to keep it easier for the field. The way they look now, without even reading them, they're intimidating.
They are intimidating.
So anyway,
Uh,
that's my take on kind of management systems. And of course, it's not just having the policy in place; it's implementing the policy, documenting that you've implemented, having the training around the implementation piece,
Uh-huh.
and the internal audit. So that's kind of the management system there. It can take a lot of different forms. So
Well, 88% of our audience today has a management system in place, and 13% suggested that they need to continue working on that. So there's a good portion of the audience today that has that in place and is practicing that. And degrees of success and degrees of compliance is kind of a relative term, I'm sure. And like you said, and we've talked about many times, it's a constant cycle of improvement. It's a constant change in updating this and training it and making sure that I did it, I have it, I taught it, and I can express our ability to move through this process.
yeah, continuous improvement is the key. It's all about making it better, and it's always a works in progress. Always. Companies are very dynamic, and the regulations are dynamic, and it constantly needs to be refreshed. And it's good to get a cold set of eyes, and it's good to get input from operations. All these things make a management system better.
Our next poll, David, was: does your company conduct internal audits? And 75% said yes, and 25% said no. And I guess I would like to, I'll go to the next question next. However, I just wanted to kind of take a look at this and say, internal audits don't have to be complicated. However, I think it's a good practice. What are your thoughts on that?
I believe it's fundamental to the management system to have some kind of look back on the system in place.
Mm-hmm.
Is it still relevant, practical, required, and to clean that up?
Yeah.
It's going to need cleanup.
Yeah.
It's going to need something, and it needs a look back, because what happens when organizations kind of, hey, I purchased this management system from some consultant, and now it's on the shelf. See my management system.
Yeah.
It's sitting there. 5 years later, it's still sitting there. And in 5 years, there've been lots of changes.
That's not continuous improvement, right?
I've seen things in their management system that just weren't being done. I mean, things as fundamental as important as like confined space entry.
Yeah.
Having a program on the shelf, but not actually doing it. Lockout, tag out. We got a lockout, tag out program, but we're not actually, implementing it.
We don't have any tags, though.
So
we're laughing about it. However, there's reasons, unfortunately, that these policies are in place, and these regulations do exist, and it's typically and historically because someone was injured on the job.
Absolutely. And still getting injured for these things. I don't personally believe in hordes and hordes of training. I mean, keep that simple as well. Keep that short, keep that simple. You're going to wear people out with training.
Yeah.
point, they're just not interested in environmental or safety anymore. They can't even take anymore, you know. So keep that simple. Keep everything moving forward.
And this goes to the next question, which is how often do you think there should be a mock audit? And our audience said yearly, 79%. So they're on the right track, I believe. And I think that's a good interval. Some policies, I think, need a more aggressive schedule. That's a different story, and that's a management decision. And then every other year is 21%. And every 5 years, and I don't think it's worth the manpower, is 0 and 0. So we have a very enlightened audience here, David. So I think we're on the right track, and I just appreciate the fact that we can share this information. And also, you don't be afraid to talk to the people and the panelists on this SparkCon 2020 event about some of the challenges you may have in an organization, or some of the things that you want to improve in your organization, and make sure that you're doing things in the right direction. So I know we're getting close to the end, and I just want to make sure that David, we appreciate your contribution and all of the information you've been sharing today. And I know SparkCon 2020 is all about helping companies and organizations improve. So any last notes or thoughts or suggestions or recommendations about how they might consider this as they go through the current situation? Pandemic and 2020 has been kind of a challenging one. So I'd like to wrap it up with what they can do to help themselves move forward.
I would say take a step back. I know a lot of changes are happening. There's a lot of drama right now. Take a step back, breathe, make a list. Make a list of things to do. And then the next thing, take that list and number it in order of priority. And knock those things off the list. And don't get caught up in committees, meetings. Don't get caught up in that. Keep it moving, because you have other things on your list that have to be done. And the longer these things get put off, you're increasing your risk. So
that's great advice. That is great advice. I always progress over perfection. It's an ever-changing world, and it's an ever-changing environment. So just continue to make progress. And so I love that feedback, David. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today. And for those that want to get a hold of you, the information is on SparkCon.today. And you can register for future episodes if you haven't registered for everything yet. We're going to be going all week. There's a lot of speakers, presentations, and an opportunity to learn something new every single day this week. So do not hesitate to schedule your time, attend the sessions, and make sure that you have every opportunity to do what you can to improve and succeed in your business today. So thank you, David, again. And we'll be looking forward to following up with our environmental compliance and all the questions that we have going forward. So
sounds great, Russ. Thank you.
Appreciate it, everyone. And as we know, tomorrow we're going to have another session, and we're going to be talking about another topic. Let me bring that up before we close out and make sure that I get the title correct, because as we know, it's about HDD risk management with Glenn tomorrow. I believe that's 5th. Is that the right date? Nope. No. Improved ground investigations for pipelines and linear construction with Vatsal Shah. And so that's going to be tomorrow morning. So I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to sign up for that and join us then. And also, I think we only have one session tomorrow. So give you a break, get your Tuesday morning situated, and join us for improved ground investigations for pipelines and linear construction from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Central Time. Thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Russ.
Take care.